Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman. And in this episode, I'm talking with Acquanda, who tells her story of how she used to eat tons of sugar and her decision to stop. Why? Well, you'll hear why in this episode, as well as what she realized once she did stop eating sugar, about how she could get her own personal power back so that she didn't feel powerless and helpless with sugar. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_lifeaftersugar. All right, let's get to my chat with Acquanda. All right, so today I'm here with Acquanda. And Acquanda, can you tell us a little bit about your background with food and sugar?
Yeah, so I actually felt that for the most part, I was kind of like semi-healthy. Like I thought I was eating things that I thought were healthy. And that's why I say like, okay, I was semi-healthy. Like, for example, I would eat like a yogurt at one point in my life, I would eat like a yogurt after dinner or something like that, which at the time I thought it was healthy. Later on, when I moved closer to my little sister who has an incredible sweet tooth, I kind of really drifted away from that. And so I started eating many more sweets. I still had a relatively what I thought was a healthy diet, but looking back now, I'm like, okay, some of those things are kind of questionable and not just like the store-bought yogurt, but like, okay, baby carrots and things like that. And people would always comment on meals like, oh, they're healthy, only because they were usually unprocessed. But I thought, I was eating very healthy, and it just, those things, most of them were store-bought. And I would have dessert occasionally, like I said, until I moved closer to my little sister. And then when I moved closer to her, she has an incredible sweet tooth, and she's a really good cook, and she is a phenomenal, she makes the best dessert. And so I was eating them, and then I noticed I'm eating them all the time. And so it kind of just spiraled from there. I found myself craving sweets and buying, stuff out of the store that was just I would eat those cupcakes and, and I kind of wouldn't give it a second thought just because it tastes good. And it never dawned on me wow, this is not great. We've normalized eating sweets and eating cupcakes and eating all that stuff every once, but I didn't realize I had started really consuming that stuff. And so then it kind of went on a downward spiral from there, where I was just kind of always eating, I think every single day I was eating something that that was obvious sugar. Like, we know that sugar is hidden in a lot of things, but like obvious sugar is like, a piece of cake or cookies or, a candy bar or something. I noticed that just about every single day I was having something that was like obvious.
Okay. And the rest of your diet, was it like healthy in air quotes?
Yeah. Yes. It was an air quotes healthy because, like I said, I thought, like, I know a lot more now than I did then, but for the most part, I ate a lot of unprocessed things. But like I said, I was eating, like, for example, people would comment, like, oh, you eat so healthy. Like, I would go to work and I would have like baby carrots and, rice and things like that in this meal. And it was unprocessed. And from, that vantage point, it looked pretty healthy. And most of the things I ate were, they were not processed, like they were not ultra processed, except, sometimes. But for the most part, it was relatively healthy, again, in air quotes. And because, like I said, I've always kind of like been semi-health conscious. Like, I grew up, in Orange County, California. So I had access to information, but, you get like you see that information as you grow up, and it kind of like is in the back of your mind, and you don't have, at least I did not have that consciousness about food that I do now. So
And
now it's like, a lot different.
now you're more conscious. What flipped that switch from, less to more conscious about your food?
Oh, wow. So I went to do research. So I studied Black and African American breastfeeding, and I did that research for over 10 years. And so I was in graduate school, and so you have to conduct research, in order to graduate and fulfill the requirements for the degree. And so I was researching Black and African American breastfeeding in the Deep South. And when I went to the South, I just started seeing things that really scared me. So I was wondering, like of all the women, like there's a lot of women who today are not breastfeeding their babies. My research was on Black and African Americans because I am an African American, and I have a lot of like history with the community that I was working with. And so I wanted to see, like, well, what is the reason that, women are not breastfeeding their babies as much as they did at one point in history, like a couple decades ago, a few decades ago? What's the reason? So I would go down there and I would, talk to people, do interviews, and et cetera, et cetera. And so while I was down there, I started seeing things, and like, I was learning why there was a lower breastfeeding rate, and other things outside of that didn't necessarily seem as connected, where like people were just so sick. And I met people who were telling me about their relatives who like had major strokes in like their early and mid 30s. And like I met a lady, her brother died, he was 35, from a major heart attack. And I would see people, they were just so sick. And I came from a location, like I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest for almost 20 years, where there's a drastic difference in food. And so in the Deep South, in many places, it could be considered an apartheid, like a food apartheid, where even though there is, very rich soil, the access to food and access to resources and the information about being healthy is just not there. And I remember thinking, like, even with the consciousness that I had back then, I was thinking a dietary change would just be so, like, it would drastically change the lives and, the outcomes of health down here. And I just started noticing, like everything was chips and cookies were part of the diet. Fast food joints. When I first went down there to do research, There was almost nothing but fast food. I had to eat fast food like for a week because I went down there to do research, and I intentionally did not want a rental car because I wanted to interact with the people, like on public transportation. However, there was no public transportation, and I thought there was public transportation, but it took me 2 hours round trip to walk to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And even in the grocery store, the options were limited.
Mm-hmm.
And when that kind of started playing like I started getting like a larger picture just about food and access. And from there, I think that kind of really set the stage to where I became more conscious about sugar because of how people were just so sick. And I'm just thinking like, well, dietary changes would, really change the health outcomes. And then I just started to learn about sugar. And I don't remember exactly what it was that sparked the desire for me to investigate sugar. But this was at the same time where it was just like I started to kind of see things that were little things like, okay, I did not realize that sugar was in so many of the foods that I was eating every day that I thought, okay, they were harmless snacks. Like, okay, some pretzels, some crackers, it was in everything. And then I kind of started doing more research from there, and I started watching documentaries. And I think the thing that really tipped me over the edge was I watched this documentary called the Sugar documentary. And at the very beginning of that documentary, there's this family sitting at the table, and they were saying how people eat so much sugar like that it's like they're just eating it out of a bag. And the family at the table, they just had these bags of sugar, and they were just eating them out of the bag. And it just that is really what set me off. And then I just started learning how like sugar was also in other things like bacon. Like I don't eat bacon, but it was just crazy that it was in everything. Things I thought, were healthy and that were wholesome contain sugar, and it's to get us hooked, and our health is suffering because of it. Like literally suffering. And it doesn't just, have the ability to kill people. It literally detracts from the quality of life that a lot of people are having and the excess of it. And I started boycotting it because I'm like, well, look what this is doing to my community. Like there's already this food apartheid. And top it off, there's this sugar, sugar is added to everything to keep people addicted. And, we know how things work when there are populations that are marketed differently than others, but every population is marketed in terms of the companies wanting them to consume sugar. It's just kind of amazing how like it's all demographics, how they just want the corporations want people to consume sugar, and they put sugar in everything, so we're addicted. So the corporations make more money, and it's literally killing people, and it's literally detracting from our quality of life. And so being in the South is really what set me off, what really ignited the fire underneath me to really investigate sugar. And I did. And I stopped consuming refined sugar at the end of 2019 or early I think it was the end of 2019.
Wow.
So that is what did it. And like I said, I started seeing like, wow, it's everywhere. It's literally in everything. And I kind of learned the science behind it and the social, reasons behind it. And that's what did it.
Yes. And, the processed foods industry is a great equalizer. Economically speaking, it will not care which economic group you belong to. It just wants to sell
Absolutely. To you. It just wants to sell to you. It just wants us to consume that sugar to get addicted. And I was reading how it's so, it's so addictive because it sends these sensors to your brain, and it's like it's a reward center, and you crave it. It's absolutely insane. But you're right. It does not matter what economic class, what race, what gender. It really, it's everywhere. And I say that it's even worse than like some hard drugs because sugar is ubiquitous. It's literally everywhere. We can go to the laundromat, we can go to the store, we can go to the park, we can go, to get our tires fixed. And there are snack machines full of candy bars and chips and cookies, whereas, the other stuff is, undercover and it's not as accessible. Absolutely. As, Three Musketeers or whatever, candy bar is on the market.
Absolutely. Totally. I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. And when you stopped eating sugar, how did you find that? Was it hard? Was it easy?
I actually thought it was going to be hard, but I actually chanted that I would release this because I think I had as much as I did not want to admit it, I think I had a little addiction because I was eating it all the time, and I chanted, that I could get away from this, and like from one day to the next, I had no desire after kind of like, honestly, I had an epiphany. It was just like an awakening. And that's what happened. I did not have bad cravings. Before that, I did find it difficult. But then I said, I'm gonna chant about this like I chant about other things in my life, And that's what happened. It was very easy. And that's what I tell people. If, you're having an issue with when I try and talk people out of sugar or whatever, like go to your higher power, that's what happened with me. And it was not difficult.
It's so varied how people react when they stop sugar. For some people, it's just like impossibly hard and, like a huge mountain to climb, and they get like physical symptoms. And on the other end of the scale, there's people like you that I'm sure nobody envies, sarcasm, that just sell through.
Yeah. And I'm actually a little surprised. Because it was more difficult at first. But like I said, I went to a higher power, and that's what did it for me. And then seeing all of just the people and their health, and I've kind of like, always been kind of anti-establishment and kind of going against the grain. And establishment promotes sugar and the grain promotes it. And so it kind of fueled me a little bit more. I'm sure that helped to be like, I want to boycott this because, it would be like a counterculture and anti-establishment. And I'm sure that helped.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, people have a lot of different reactions. I know someone who they would get headaches, if they didn't have something sweet. And to me, and I understand, I'm not judging. I used to smoke cigarettes, so I totally understand what addiction is like. But that is for me, when it came to sugar, that was the big issue, that it's so hidden in everything, and it causes all these reactions. That was one more reason to want to just give it up.
Yeah, yes. And what you say about the availability, the access to real foods and the availability of highly processed sugary foods is absolutely true, you know. It's all very well saying eat whole foods, but if you don't have easy access to them, either geographically or economically, then it's just useless to tell someone to go and eat real foods if they can't get access to them.
It's so true. It seems impossible sometimes. And I've been traveling, and I've been in different cities, and it's kind of, and even I know this stuff, and it's hard to find. As I'm in some cities sometimes, and I'm like, it's really hard to find stuff that is healthy.
Yeah.
And if you aren't sure what that is, health in the context for, that person or that group or that household, it's even more difficult. I think, what I would always say to people is, if you are able to, make it yourself, process it yourself, and then at least you get less of the chemicals and the sugars and the salts and all of that other stuff than you would get at the store,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that requires a certain amount of knowledge or skill in food preparation, which also we don't all have equally.
I completely agree with you.
Mm.
It's real, and I know that there's a lot of organizations and people out there working towards that, and to, have people, to allow people to have more access to information and et cetera, but it's very real.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know that, the majority of people don't, because a lot of people are still eating stuff who are health conscious, or, that still contain, and corporations are still sneaking it in, and everyone's so busy that it's easy to get that in.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's a whole context. We can't just take sugar out of its economic context, and we can't take eating whole foods out of that its own economic context, because that's not realistic. So is there
Right.
any kind of solution that you've seen, found, thought of, noticed for that whole situation? Not an ideal solution, but a solution.
Like I said, just try. I believe in sovereignty. I believe that we can't just rely on, an establishment to change things. We cannot rely on establishment to better our health, because the establishment has an agenda. And I believe in sovereignty. I believe that we, the people, have power. And like I said, what my recommendations to people are to do it themselves. There's a lot of information on, like, YouTube. There's a lot of online stuff. There are people in the community, and I think that if we really start telling people, and people start understanding how damaging sugar is and processed foods are, and that little things can make a difference. Like, when I was in the South, one thing I did often was show people how easy it was to make peanut butter in a Vitamix.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, this is literally all it takes. Even I did not have access to organic peanuts in the South, and I really, would prefer organic peanuts, but I did not have access to that. So I would go to the store and I would buy the whole peanuts, like just the regular conventional 1 pound jar of peanuts. And I would tell people, this is, sovereignty. Like, this is a better solution. It's a better product because you are getting it. It has one ingredient. you are removing yourself from all of that other stuff that's, spiking your blood sugar and doing all whatever else it's doing. And I believe that that kind of information is what has worked for me as far as what I know how to, what could be a solution for people and for at least for myself. And what I've tried to show people is to do it yourself as much as you can. And that would make a drastic difference.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Starting with educating ourselves. Because,
absolutely.
yeah, because the messages that we get about nutrition and sugar are, well, skewed, let's say politely.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's all in the culture. We go to a celebration, they have a cake. We go to, it has to change. That has to change. And like I said, YouTube is such a good resource. I actually, right before we got on this call, I was straining a kefir. I had started reading a book recently, and the guy was talking about kefir, and I started making it. And I went to YouTube after that, of course, kind of to get some more information about it. And I've been making them, and it's the easiest thing. Yeah. And I've learned a lot of other stuff off of YouTube. And YouTube is an excellent educational resource for things like this, and to do things very simply. And so maybe, have that conversation with people more, like, look on YouTube, put a list together or something. But people also have to be willing. What I have noticed when I was in the South is that people want to change. People want to be healthier. It's just not necessarily, it's not something that the access to that change, whether it be, the knowledge about it or whatever, is not easily accessible. Which is like I said, YouTube.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yes, absolutely. And podcasts like this one.
Absolutely. I was so excited to find this podcast. And I specifically looked for a sugar-free podcast because I had been sugar-free for I started listening in 2021. And I was so happy to find it because I'm like, oh, there's people around me that get it.
Yeah, there's more than you would think.
It's been very helpful.
No, it's more people than you would think are aware of the bad effects of sugar and that are talking about it. It's just that it feels like we have to shout really loudly to get through all the noise with the diet culture, the processed foods industry, and so on.
Absolutely. There's like it kind of reminds me of like I don't have any children. I have raised a lot of them, but when I hear people say, like, you can raise your child as best as you can, and they're always going to they will still be heavily influenced by their peers. But the difference here is that the peers are like corporations who have like aggressive marketing tactics, and so I think oftentimes that's overshadowed by, even the things that we say, and kind of like trying to talk to people about it. And it's literally a drug. And so that, being up against that is kind of difficult. So yeah, definitely shout it.
Yeah. Yes, shout. And but shout quietly, as it were, because, it's like the more of us that talk about sugar and share our stories, the louder the message is, without us having to shout, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And
for sure. And at least, I was going to say, at least the seed is planted. One thing that I noticed when I was doing research on breastfeeding, and I know that a lot of other people were like, okay, we want to see women breastfeeding now. And I think that when, people are so deeply like rooted, like, something is so deeply rooted in culture, or so that it takes a while for that change to happen. And what I have I've resolved that as long as I plant the seed, then that's what matters, because it may not happen like right now, as much as I'd like to see more women breastfeeding, as much as I like to see more people stop consuming refined sugar, as long as I plant the seed, hopefully it is going to germinate. It may not be, next week or next month or next year, but at some point,
Yes.
I believe that it'll happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your outlook, which, it's relatively rare that we get into the details of the real life access to real foods, real whole foods, and the difficulty in eating healthy and being healthy. And I'm so happy that you brought this up in this episode. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Acquanda. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
So great to be having this conversation about access to real whole foods, because let's face it, highly processed foods that are engineered by the food industry are pretty much available everywhere. Every corner store, every gas station. There's really no place where we're not bombarded with offers of added sugar. And even though the messages that we receive are to eat more real whole foods, as Acquanda was saying, that's fine in theory, but what do you do when you don't have access to those foods, either geographically or economically? And we do tend to believe that real whole foods are more expensive, but actually what I teach in the Freedom from Cravings formula program is that eating real whole foods is actually cheaper than eating prepackaged processed foods. And you can learn to get your power over sugar back with my help inside of the program. Want to know more? It's a program that's specifically designed for women over 50 who want to get rid of cravings and feel more in control around food, especially sugar and comfort foods. In the program, you'll get step-by-step guidance and customized support through the 5-step formula that I've developed to help you get control over cravings so that you can finally live your life with more energy and fit into your favorite clothes effortlessly and feel confident in your food choices so that you can ditch the shame and embarrassment that you feel every time your emotions make you slip or fall off the wagon, and so that you never feel like you're on some kind of a restrictive diet. If you're at the stage of your life where you're finally ready to look after yourself, let's chat. You can hop on a free clarity call with me at any time by going to aftersugarclub.com and clicking on the big green button, Schedule a Clarity Call. We'll have a quick 30-minute one-on-one chat to see if the Freedom from Cravings Formula 90-day program is a good fit for you. So go to aftersugarclub.com. Speak soon. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.